All right, thanks for everybody for being here. This computer is updating and restarting for the third time. So whenever it gets going, hopefully Ethan will have our slides pulled up. But until then, we won't have those beautiful slides that I made. Sorry. So it's been a couple weeks since we've been in here talking about neighboring, but hopefully the concept hasn't left you. Does anyone have, and man, this is a reach. I really hope I'm going to get some feedback here. So here we go. Did anyone attempt any type of neighboring since we last met? And that could mean as, hey, I met someone, a neighbor that I never met before. It could be I just had a good conversation with the neighbor. I did something for a neighbor. Anybody? What you got, Houston? Hey, very cool, Houston. That's known as neighborhood. There you go. That's it. That's neighboring. We got to think about, a lot of churches will start programs, and I'm sure Westgate's guilty of this too. Starting programs, and there's like these intentions behind it. Sometimes you hear the fact that Westgate has goals, and you see that as a program, and it's really, there's kind of like this ulterior motive behind it. But one of the things that we talked about in this first class of neighboring, there should be no ulterior motive behind your neighboring, right? There is no, well, I'm going to talk to this neighbor because I need to get them in church. That's actually not the motive you have. You have no ulterior motives. The way this book that we've read and we've kind of compiled these lessons on, called The Art of Neighboring, one of the things that he says is you don't have an ulterior motive, you have an ultimate motive. You're in this for the long haul, long obedience, being with your neighbors for the long term. You're slowly every day working with them. So that's why it can't be one of these sporadic encounters with your neighbors. We eventually want to work towards constant interaction, constant contact with neighbors. Because God, this is my belief, God has placed you, hey, sorry, that's not big. All right, you're all going to hear the password. The password is Booth, B-O-O-T-H.
Properly spelled with an E.
Okay, properly spelled with an E. There we go. So we don't have ulterior motives, we have ultimate motives. So our ultimate motive is, I want this person to be with Jesus, and so I'm going to do everything I can to be a good neighbor. And I know that's tough. I've got one crazy neighbor. I mean, he's just mean. He's ugly to me. The 2 or 3 encounters, he's just been actually like ugly, and it's wild. You just never expect that. But at the same time, I've had some great encounters with neighbors that I know if we hadn't just been playing outside that day, if we had not, asked to borrow something or whatever it is, I would have never met that person. I would have never had that contact. I would have never had the opportunity to just speak with them. So neighboring is this long haul, long obedience type of thing. And we're not just talking about short, quick interactions. We're talking about just being consistent. Sometimes they are short interactions. But what we also want to work towards is like real community with these people. Because again, it's my belief that God has placed me in my neighborhood. When we moved to Westgate, we looked at several different houses, and it was just like nothing was working out. We didn't like, according to our budget, we didn't want to live here. We didn't like this house yet, and we ended up in the neighborhood that we're in. And I could say, well, that was because we said no to some houses, or yes to this house, or I could look at it as God has purposed this. He has placed me in my community for a purpose. That community needs me. I hope you can see that with you and your family and your community. It should be that second set of slides there once you get it worked out. So just to recap, one of the things that we talked about was there's no ulterior motive, there's only an ultimate motive. And the basis, the theological basis for our neighboring is what? Do y'all remember? two great things. Two great. I'm going to underline and like put a little great. Anybody? Great command. What's the great command? The greatest command is love the Lord your God. The second one's just like it in love your neighbor. And then we have another great is what? The Great Commission. That's what all of this is built on. So that's our what the theological. Let me work through this real quick. So those are some of the things we talked about. We talked about love and hurry are not compatible. That was the big point from that first lesson that really sticks out with me. If your schedule is jam-packed, you don't have time to be a neighbor. And that's not the excuse to not be a neighbor. It means, well, I need to work out my schedule. I need to be more flexible. I need to be around for people. I need to make contact with people and just say, hey, if you ever need anything, that's what I did with one of my neighbors that live across the street. Come Christmas time, we haven't really talked that much, but I sent out a text to all of my local neighbors. I said, hey, Merry Christmas. I'm so glad that you're my neighbor. I feel like God has blessed me with you being my neighbor. Just to remind you, if you ever need anything, let me know. Just to my immediate neighbors. That's an easy thing to do. Now, the first step was making contact and getting their cell phone number, right? But they have mine, I have theirs, and we're in contact. That's just like a basic way to kind of start out this neighboring deal. So, of course, this hasn't updated, and none of my new slides are here. Cool. All right. Well, we'll just ignore that, and we'll work through it. So, I want you to think about the last 3 news stories you read or heard. They could be small, they could be local, they could be global. Think of the last 3. How did they make you feel? Did you, by chance, find yourself shopping for a new security system? Or, looking up life insurance? Or, you start thinking these dark thoughts. I mean, normally when we go to the news, we normally don't walk away feeling great about our culture, our society, our neighborhoods, right? It's like the news cycle it really feeds on the negative. It feeds on what? 4-letter word. Fear. It really feeds on your fear. The more fear they get out there, the more you're likely to tune in to see their take on it, the coverage that they have on this specific issue. They can feed on fear. It appears that news channels are always about the most evilest thing. The most evilest, right? Good grammar. The most evilest thing out there. This creates in us a low-grade fear that we carry around with us all of the time. Do you sense that at all? In your families, or maybe you don't want to attribute to you, that's fine, but maybe to your family members, there's kind of this low-grade fear we carry around with us. This low-grade fear creates a lot of toxic things. It affects how we view each other and what we assume about the unknown. Because that's probably the most scary thing, right? What is unknown. And this frame of mindset is toxic, is absolutely destructive to neighboring. Because most likely when we start talking about neighboring, you think about the weird neighbors, the mean neighbors, the neighbors you don't know anything about, and all of these stories start swirling around. This mindset causes us to bring fear into those relationships. So let me ask you a question, because I'm going to say yes to this, and I'm going to say that I even got it from my grandparents. Because when I would go to my grandparents' house, they would do this. Do you, by any chance, you and your family, maybe just use an individual, maybe it's not spoken, do you make up stories about your neighbors whom you don't know? Anybody? When I'd go over to my grandparents' house, they're older, retired, and sit out on their front porch. God bless them. This particular grandfather, he turned 89 yesterday. He'd sit on their front porch, and they would just, we would come over and they would update us on each neighbor, right? They said, well, he left for work a little bit late. Da, da, da. You know, they have everybody. They knew everybody's schedules. They lived in a cul-de-sac, which probably made it worse. So it's just like what each neighbor, they would go around and what each neighbor did. They had nicknames for them. They had just bits and pieces of information. So then they would fill in the rest. Oh, they probably do this. Oh, they probably know. You know what I'm saying? Do you do that at all? I have found myself doing that a little bit with my neighbors. One particular neighbor I've got, I don't really know what's going on, and me and Kaylee assume a lot of things because the interactions I have had with him have always been very suspicious. Sus, right? Very sus. And so you kind of like end up making up stories. So anyway, mindsets, or most of us don't realize that our fears make people afraid of us, right? We do that with other people. I wonder who does that with us. We perpetuate the cycle by withdrawing and end up making people afraid of us. While we're busy guessing who they are and believing the worst, they are often doing the same thing towards us. Someone has to break the cycle of the unknown. Not knowing people can really lead to fear. Oh, I'm not going to feel safe going out here. We create these stories in our head. So another question would be, who might be making up stories about you? Think about your neighbors and how well they know you. Do you think they sit around and think, I wonder if they're up to that? I wonder if this is their hobby or this is the bad habit they have? Who might even be fearful or intimidated by you because they don't know you? What kind of personality do you give off in your neighborhood? It could be the way that your house and lawn is kept. It could be the way your cars are kept. It could be where you park. I park a lot of times in my yard because we just have this one narrow, and so it's creating like this big dry patch in your yard. And we've got some yardies in our neighborhood, who are really big. And so I feel like I'm probably judged a little bit for that because I don't care what my grass looks like. But what kind of things do you do around your house in your neighborhood? Do you speed? Or do you go really slow? What are you doing? What image are you giving off to your neighbors? And what stories might they be making up about you? All because of the unknown. You haven't spoken with them. You haven't created that relationship. You haven't connected Jesus between the two of you. The really odd neighbor that we have a lot of suspicious interactions with, especially to begin with, very suspicious things he would say to me and all this kind of stuff. I found out he's a Christian. And that's been our connection. We talk about things like that. It's nice. Fear is spoken of. Sometimes this will update as we go along. Okay, it's just not going to update. We'll just turn this off because it's distracting now. One of the things that we have kind of these, I guess we're going to call them points, or Chris liked the word axiom. That sounds a little too intense for me. But there are 3 points that we kind of want to bring out in all of these lessons. The first point would be, if you're taking any notes, our fears are often unwarranted and may be obstacles to obeying the great command. Fear is spoken frequently in Scripture. If you think about it, you can think of stories where fear is brought up. Not having fear is normally the way that fear is spoken to us from God. Think of Deuteronomy, when you get into the Shema, which is God telling families how they're supposed to live. Say, listen, O Israel, do not fear, but keep these commandments. Love the Lord your God. He goes into the greatest command in Deuteronomy. Happens again in Deuteronomy 10. The end of Ecclesiastes ends with fear God and keep his commandments. If you move into where we got Joshua also, where Joshua's going to lead the Israelites, and God says, do not fear, but be courageous. You move into the New Testament, that's one of the last things that Jesus says to his disciples before he ascends into heaven. He says, don't fear, I'm going to be with you always. In Romans 8, Paul says, who should you fear? Why should you fear anyone? Who could bring any type of charge against you because of the God that you believe in? And again, 2 Timothy 1:7, this might be the more popular. For God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of self-control. If we do not have fear, if we're not supposed to be people defined, described by our fear, we shouldn't fear the unknown. We shouldn't fear the people in closest proximity to us. That shouldn't be a way that we live our day to day, in fear of what this person might be doing or might be involved in. But casting out fear, because that's what perfect love will do. If I have perfect love for my community, I'm not content with the unknown. I'm not okay with living in fear, but I'm going to dispel those things by bringing light and being known into my community. So, we're not saying, of course, that you should ignore every bad vibe you get from someone, or ignore situations that could potentially harm your family. But we need to make sure those decisions are derived from facts. We actually know things. Hey, we know this about this person, so we do need to be careful. That's just being smart. That's understanding that person's faults and foibles, understanding your own faults and foibles, and doing what you can to dispel the unknown. Because Satan can use our fear to keep us from fulfilling the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. Fear is perception, a tool used by the evil one that can grow within us and keep us from doing God's will. One of the authors of this book, The Art of Neighboring, shares a story about a former neighbor of his. It was an elderly man who rarely came out of his house. And when he did, he would literally give this man evil stares. You know, he was just he was a creepy old man. And he had made a couple attempts to get to know him, but the older man wasn't having it. Anytime he would approach the man, like when he's working outside, the old man would quickly go in his home, shut the door and lock it, wouldn't answer if the man knocked. Odd, crazy stuff like that. But it just so happened one day he worked up the courage again, and he goes out to meet the old man while the man is in his yard. He says, "Hey, I've been living here for a while. I've been trying to get around to meeting you. My name's so-and-so." Well, the old man finally responds, and he admits, this was a long conversation, I'm just condensing it. After a long conversation, the man admits, I'm really scared. I'm older, I don't have any family that lives around me, I'm a widower, and I'm honestly scared of the people in my neighborhood. I don't like meeting people. And after a longer conversation, Jesus comes into the mix, and this man ends up having an incredible witness, an incredible testimony about Jesus. And this man and the older man are able to make this really good relationship. But until that point, you see what the unknown was doing there. It caused the man to kind of make excuses of getting around to meet the neighbor. He's mean, he doesn't want to talk to me. The older man had this fear of the unknown of, I don't know what's going to happen to me if someone just tries to take advantage of me. I don't know what's going to happen to me if fill in the blank. The unknown about our neighbors is often what's going to keep us from fulfilling the Great Commandment, the Great Commission, and this art of neighboring. So what you may have discovered, or you soon will, is that neighboring is a messy business. If you truly make an effort to meet those people who God has placed around you, you will quickly realize you don't like some of them. They may have lifestyles you don't approve of, habits you think grotesque, or beliefs you don't share. What is so great about these types of opportunities is that it gives you a chance to live the way Jesus did. There are actually several occasions where Jesus is condemned because of his willingness to eat with sinners. If you look at Matthew 11 or Luke 15. There's even a scene when he's eating in the house of Simon the Pharisee, where Jesus lets a woman who maybe was a prostitute, but she's definitely labeled a sinner. She's labeled a sinner, and she comes in and washes Jesus' feet. A very intimate moment. And Jewish law would say, you don't let the sinner touch you, because that sinner will defile you. But Jesus allows that woman to wash his feet. And he actually blesses her over the religious in the room. Jesus allowed these relationships to form. These relationships with people who we would say, I don't want anything to do with. I know what they're into now. Who knows what they've been into before? They're better just not to have around my family. They're better not to keep company with. Jesus didn't think that way. He specifically reached out to those people who were outcast, who were sick, who were hurting. So, let's say we get into this neighboring business and we get really good at it. No doubt, there's going to come a time where you begin neighboring and creating a relationship with someone who has a questionable lifestyle, who even looks and dresses questionable. They don't really fit the church atmosphere. But you create that relationship, and man, you even work up the nerve to invite them into the family. And they even respond with a yes. What do you think that would look like for you? Is if you brought someone of a questionable appearance, questionable background, questionable lifestyle choices, and you brought them here to Westgate, how do you think our church family would respond to that? From what I see, pretty good, right? I think we have people that come in here that wouldn't meet the church atmosphere, the church schema, and I think they're welcomed and loved. That's one of the things I really love about Westgate. So I want you to think about this. When you're neighboring, it's not just you making that relationship on your own, right? When you come and you bring that person, you have a whole 300-person cohort neighboring with you. It's not just you doing the neighboring anymore. It's you bring them into this web, and we all work with you to neighbor that person. Jesus makes religious people uncomfortable due to the company he kept. He justifies this by saying, I came for the sick. I think it's really great. I know a lot of you work in very prestigious areas. You work with a lot of people probably that are on your same socioeconomic level. And so bringing those people in really wouldn't be difficult. Focusing on those type of people really wouldn't be difficult. They're fun, they're easy, you get along with them. But notice that's not Jesus' target audience. Right? It's not Jesus' target audience. If those are the only people we're around, we also need to be thinking about ways we can move into areas where the sick truly are. And not just the physically, but the spiritually. And that's what's great about even in your context where you are. You probably got people that look up to par. You probably got people that look like they've got it all together, but they're spiritually sick. And that should be our target audience. So if you want to turn your Bibles to Luke 5, verses 27 through 32. When someone gets there, would you mind reading that out loud? Luke 5, 27 through 32.
After that, he went out to notice the tax collector, named Levi, sitting in the tax booth. And he said to him, follow me. He left everything behind and got up and began following him. And Levi gave a big reception to the house. And there was a great crowd of tax collectors and other people who were reclining at the table. The Pharisees and their scribes began grumbling at his disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? Jesus answered and said, it is not those who are well who need a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners.
This might be one of the more tame instances of Jesus hanging out with people who the religious groups said you shouldn't hang out with. But I mean, one of the people he calls to be part of his intimate students, his disciples, was a tax collector. And he was a Jew. His name was Levi. He's a Jew that's a tax collector. So this is a man who has turned against his own people. He's turned against the Jewish people to actually come into their houses and demand by the state to give him their money. And it was a tax collector, norm to ask for more than you really needed. Because as a tax collector, you had to. If you wanted to feed your family, you had to tag on a bit in order to do that. Levi was not liked by his own people. The Romans didn't care anything for him either. In their eyes, he's a traitor too. Has anybody seen The Chosen? By watching it? We see that story of Matthew play out. He's the outcast. And that's one of the people that Jesus goes to. So, there is a chance, though, when we're talking about fear, we're talking about neighboring, we're talking about the unknown, there is a chance of bad things happening. That's just like the reality of it. You get in to meet someone, if you've ever read the book, The Gospel Comes with a House Key by Rosaria Butterfield. She plays out neighboring to this beautiful degree that, I don't know if I could ever achieve. But she and it's one of those things you can't compare, but I do. Spiritually, she's so far beyond me. But the way that she neighbors to people, you read through her book, she has crazy stories. And some of those stories end badly for her. Her being taken advantage of because she's helping people. She's housing people. She's feeding people. She's being a neighbor unlike any other. Tells her one big long story of this neighbor who was a recluse. She ended up getting him into her family. They go on walks together. He lived by himself. He ended up really being a part of their family. Till one night, the police come in, bust up his house, drugs, paraphernalia, women, all sorts of stuff. And it's I had that man around my family. And it was a really scary moment for her. But her answer to that, her comeback to that, for those people who are thinking, see, I hope you learned your lesson. You shouldn't let people like that in your life. Her response to that is, I'm fulfilling God's commands. I'm still doing what God's called me to do, even though I might suffer for it, even though I might place myself in danger. Man, American culture, that doesn't make sense to us, right? Because we are all about health and safety. Those are the two big things we care about. Not just with ourselves, but our kids. Health and safety. Man, and this is so tough to even teach. But it's here. It's in Scripture, and we got to listen to it. But there's a second point, is that following Jesus isn't necessarily designed to be safe. We could look at Numbers 13 and the spies that went in to spy the land of Canaan. 10 said, nope, it can't be done. Look at those people. They're bigger than us. We'll never defeat them. The two, Caleb and Joshua, say, no, with God on our side, we can do anything. But because they didn't listen to the two spies, listen to the 10, they listened to the fear, how does God respond? He says, well, you're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Because of your fear, I'm pulling you back. Because of your fear, I'm not going to let you lay hold of these promises I have for you. We could also look at 1 Peter 3, 13 through 16. I encourage you to mark it and read it. But in that context, we use 1 Peter 3:15 anytime I do an evangelism class. We talk about making sure you can give a defense of the hope that lies in you. But you know the context of that passage? It's often used as a foundation of apologetics, and it should be. But looking at the context gives another theological suggestion. Because Peter is quoting Isaiah 8:12. So when you encounter other people, do not fear. Do not be frightened. Even when everyone around you chooses fear, you have a hope that is greater. Live out that hope and don't be afraid to talk about it. That's my 13 through 16 paraphrased. If we're looking at it in context, that's what Peter's telling us. There's people around you and it's scary. that doesn't mean you don't do it. That doesn't mean you don't connect. That doesn't mean you don't go out and tell them about what you have, this hope that you have in you. Has anybody watched that Stephen Colbert clip that's been going around the past couple days? Someone, I think it was Dua Lipa. I think he had her on his talk show, and rarely does the interviewee ask the interviewer questions, but she did, and she said, "Hey, I've really noticed it's really crazy. I don't know if that was planned or what, but she says, hey, I've just noticed that you seem to be like a person of faith. How do you have that work in like with this late night show stuff and like with your comedy?" And Stephen Colbert, who, you probably don't agree with him politically, probably morally, on a lot of different things, but he's brought up Catholic, and he gives an incredible response to her, and actually gave this great defense for his faith. And it took about 30 seconds. It was somewhat comical. He had this great quote from a secular author about fear and faith. And he mixed it, he contextualized his message, beautifully. And the whole audience applauds, and and it doesn't matter that he didn't bring in the gospel when he said that. It doesn't even matter that he didn't bring in her sin when he spoke with her, but he contextualized his message. And in doing that, and I'm thinking about this because he talked about fear and death, because that's what kind of supports his faith. This idea that he will no longer one day have to suffer pain and death and fear and all these sorts of things. But his ability to just simply talk about his faith in a natural way is, I think, like a key to neighboring. Is looking for those moments when finally the conversation comes up, but it doesn't come out as, well, you're a sinner, right? It doesn't look like that. It's contextualized. It makes sense in the context of your community. And that's one thing that we need to be thinking about. Because, and this is our third point, God is already working in your neighborhood. Do you believe that? God is already working in your neighborhood. God has not only been with you your whole life. God has been with every individual and family from the beginning of their lives, even if they're not believers. He's been with them, watching, placing rocks in their shoes, having other people come along and plant seeds. And he's asking you to step in, to water, to plant some more seeds, so he can give growth. And I tell you, God's the only one that can give the growth. God's the only one that's going to do the really effectual calling. But we can still come in there with this neighboring, with this loving our neighbor, and intentionally getting out there and meeting them and talking to them, being a part of their life. We can do that. I'm going to skip some of our material because for the last couple of minutes here that we have, I'm going to give us about 7-8 minutes. I'd like you to join up with your family again. If you don't have a parent here with you, I want you to just jump in with another family. One loner to a family, okay? And I want you to do some things. So can we go ahead and break up into our families? Break up into our families. You'll need some space. Break up into your families really quick. We can do this in like 1 or 2 minutes. That'd be awesome. Ethan, you come on down. Come on down and jump in with the family. You Greg. You're there, Ronnie. Some people might need to bring 2 into their group, but that's okay. I think we got a couple, 3 more, 4 more. Camille, come here with the Browns. Browns right here. Okay. Jump in there with Jennifer. You be Jennifer's baby. All right, Jennifer, you about to leave? Okay. All right, you got one right there. There you go. Okay. Okay, these are the 3 things I want you to do. And if you got multiple families, you're going to have to kind of run through this a bit quicker. But I want you to think about your block map. What I mean by block map is if you think if you've got a 3x3 grid, okay? You're the middle square, and you've got neighbors around you, okay? Think about you're in the center, and you have 8 neighbors around you. I want you to see if you can name your neighbors. First names would be great, last names would be good, and then you can get the kids' names. See how good you can do. Because let this be a test, right? Let this be let this kind of be your opening test. Where are you in the neighboring right now? Okay? How well can you neighbor right now based on who you actually know? Okay, so go ahead and do that. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 minutes. Name your block map. Name those people that live around you.